Out of these high riverbanks, a murder mystery has emerged.
He brought himself up to show us something.
A chance discovery unearths a powerful secret.
He must have been someone that really got up and really spoke for him and everything because of the wounds not in him.
A peaceful burial belies a violent death.
It's clearly a cutting trauma, dreadful axe wounds on the skull.
The injuries are puzzling, as if by a weapon of steel, not stone or wood.
It was a very aggressive and hostile attack with the intent of murder, I would say.
Aboriginal people want to know if this is a fallen fighter from a frontier war.
We're now looking at possibly 50,000 or so Aborigines killed in direct conflict with Europeans.
This skeleton raises plenty of questions, but two are crucial. When did this person die, and what was the cause of death? We're following the investigation as it unfolds. Cutting-edge technology, piecing the puzzle together.
Is this trauma indicative of pre-contact intertribal violence, or could it possibly be something that occurred during the post-contact era?
Can science solve this cold case in time before Toorale Man is finally laid to rest? This is Barkindji country, the floodplains of the Darling River in northwestern New South Wales. For millennia, it's been the homelands of Badger Bates's people. The river they know as Barker is their lifeblood.
To us Barkindji people, us Barker Wiembitja people, us Darling River people, that's our main artery there.
This area is now part of the Toorale National Park. While walking here in 2012, Barkindji elder Badger Bates made a surprising discovery.
I was coming along here and I was looking at these shell middens, see? Up to here.
And what'd you see?
I seen the skull, the person's skull. It's down in here. He was sort of laying with his head down like that, and then the mouth was open. To me, he was crying for help because of the mouth, and that's why I started to cry and I said, I'll help you.
The burial site was stabilised with the help of National Park staff, and excavation began a year later.
I'm against people just going around and looking for skulls and digging them up. But when they come up, look at them. We knew there was a massacre here. This person brought himself up to say, I was killed. Help me try and make people understand, you know, that we was here. This is what happened to us.
While his skull was sticking out, I think...
The community suspects this is a victim of frontier violence, so they offered science a rare opportunity and called in Dr. Michael Westerway, an expert in Aboriginal archaeology.
Once the pelvis is exposed, we'll be able to work out... This is a man that is carefully laid to rest by his people. The burial was very complex. His skull, beneath it was a small pillow of well-washed sand. There were leaves associated with the burial. So he hasn't just been disposed of after a nasty, violent incident. He's been cared for by his people. And when we came across the remains, they were in a tightly flexed position, almost like a fetal position, with the knees drawn up to the chest, and that is a common burial practice amongst the Barkindji traditionally. But do these remains actually represent those of an individual that was killed during frontier violence?
Finding evidence of Aboriginal people killed in frontier wars is rare. Unless they were buried in this way, it's extremely unlikely their remains are preserved.
Much of the evidence was simply destroyed. So finding direct evidence of frontier conflict is difficult.
Few people know more about Australia's 130 years of frontier warfare than historian Henry Reynolds.
It's not as though you're dealing with a European battle where a large number of people were killed in one place and often buried in mass graves. Aborigines were probably killed in a much more scattered way. There has been very, very little attempt to look at the archaeological record.
However, this case is exceptional. The Aboriginal community want the remains studied, and the skeleton is remarkably well preserved.
These sort of rich lime, sort of calcareous sort of deposits provide really good conditions for the preservation of bone. So it's not an acidic soil. The bone doesn't break down rapidly in this sort of environmental context. You rarely find a complete burial. It's not really like CSI.
But this time they have almost the entire skeleton. When fully excavated, they recovered 204 bones. Only 2 small bones were missing.
The skeleton can be considered as an osteobiography. Each bone has the potential to tell something about this individual's life.
The shape of the pelvis reveals that this person was male.
This foramen is more angular, which is a male character. The greater sciatic notch is quite tight, which is more of a male character.
From the teeth, Michael gets a sense of when this man might have lived.
We know that this individual was subsisting on a traditional diet. There is this fairly distinct pattern of occlusal wear. There's no evidence of holes in the teeth, caries, dental caries. We don't really start to see dental caries in the teeth until the arrival of a European diet rich in flour and sugar.
From his close reading of the bones, Michael can tell they belong to a healthy, 20-something Aboriginal male who ate a traditional diet and enjoyed a meal of yabbies.
It's very rare that you actually see the stomach contents preserved, but in this instance we found gastroliths from yabbies, so small little gizzard stones that were found within this individual's stomach.
A Last Supper, as it turned out. Despite the careful burial, his death had been horrific. There's evidence of multiple trauma, including rib injuries, as well as savage blows to the skull.
I would imagine that the head wound would have caused the death of the person.
Michael called on the expertise of one of Australia's foremost forensic anthropologists, Professor Richard Wright. While he finds a 99.6% probability that the skull is an Aboriginal man from this part of Australia, he has a special interest in the injuries. Richard worked on the exploration of mass graves in the Ukraine and in Bosnia, identifying victims of genocide.
I had a lot of experience with people who'd been violently killed, so I had a look at the axe marks. It was clearly done in what we call perimortem time, that is around the time of death, and when the bone was full of collagen. One of the chop marks, the piece that came off is hinged off, and that only happens in the case of fresh green bone. But whether it's done with a machete or whether it's done with a steel axe or a stone axe, I don't know.
Whether it's a steel or a stone weapon is key to establishing the circumstances of his death. Steel only arrived in Australia with Macassan fishermen in the north, and then with European settlement.
What is very interesting about this wound is that it seems to represent a sharp edge trauma rather than shattering of the bone.
There appears to be a long cut that extends from the skull and into the cheekbone below the right eye.
When you look carefully at these sort of lesions, the striations are fairly diagnostic of an edged steel weapon. So it may actually be evidence for frontier violence. This is significant because we actually haven't seen anything like this in the archaeological record in Australia before.
Battles between Europeans and Aborigines occurred throughout Australia, including the Darling.